Hello everyone, and hello Ray. For all those of you who are watching, I'm making this video especially for Ray, one of my compadres on the Collab channel. I'm a part of the Movie Reviewers 100. A couple weeks ago, a movie called Boyhood opened here in the States, and probably will be opening very soon in the UK. And Ray asked me to make a video about the movie's director, Richard Linklater, which I'm only too happy to do because Richard Linklater is a director I've been following for a long time, ever since I saw his big breakout indie hit Slacker in 1991. Richard Linklater is kind of similar to Robert Rodriguez in that they both live in Austin, Texas, and they're both real do-it-yourself filmmakers. They don't work with large crews most of the time and put together movies pretty much themselves rather than, hire themselves out for studio projects. Actually, I think Linklater does that more than Rodriguez, actually, at least lately. Linklater is responsible for the Jack Black comedy The School of Rock, which is his biggest hit. He also did a remake of The Bad News Bears, but those are probably the most mainstream films that he's made. Most of them are pretty independent, low-key kind of affairs, so he's got his own sort of distinct flavor of sort of a relaxed style of filmmaking. Some people have called him a very compassionate and humanitarian filmmaker, as opposed to the Coen brothers, say, who will make comedies and other films in which there are a lot of characters worth ridiculing, and they delight in ridiculing them. Linklater feels compassionate, it would seem, for most, if not all, of the characters that he features in his stories. So that makes him, someone. It would just seem like his sort of collaborative process and the types of stories he ends up choosing to tell and the characters he has a lot of sympathy for, and isn't really out to just do any sort of like vicious dark comedies or anything like that. That's not really his style. He's also not really into fast-paced action movies, thrillers, things like that. It's a more relaxed style of filmmaking. He's very collaborative, as I said, with his actors, as well as I'm sure with his crew people. He's had actors basically contribute a lot of ideas towards their characters in his films. In particular, the movies that he's made with Ethan Hawke and Julie Delpy. He's made 3 of those in particular with the same set of characters, and on the second and third films he had them collaborate on these scripts. There was scripts, it wasn't like they just made it up as they went along, but he sought input for them. And he also sought input from his actors for his new movie, Boyhood. I saw this movie about a week and a half ago, Boyhood, and while it isn't my favorite of Linklater's films, I have a couple issues with it. It certainly is admirable just for the fact that it was completed in the first place. If you're not familiar with the film, basically it focuses on a family living in Texas. You have the mother, played by Patricia Arquette, the father, played by Ethan Hawke, and there are 2 kids, a daughter and son, Mason. And Mason is played by a kid named Eller Salmon. And they first started filming this movie in 2002 when Coltrane, for some reason I thought that his name was Salmon, like the fish. I think that was misreported a couple of years ago. It's a movie that I've been reading about actually over the years, ever since, I don't know when I first heard of it, but what they did was they filmed, starting in 2002, they filmed for a few days during the summer, and then they got back together again the following summer to film another 3 or 4 days, and then the summer after that for another 3 or 4 days. And what we see is sort of a progression of growth. Eller Coltrane was 6 years old when they started, and when they finally filmed the last segment, in last summer, 2013, he was 18 years old. And so the movie sort of charts his progress from being an elementary school kid to being a high school graduate and about to start college. And so you see over the course of this movie, this is over 2.5 hours long, the slow, gradual change that occurs over his entire childhood until he's a young man. Also, of course, in addition to him, his older sister is played by Lorelei Linklater, the director's daughter. She also, of course, grows from a little girl to, a teenager, and I guess she's about 21 years old when the movie ends. And, of course, his parents, Patricia Arquette, Ethan Hawke, return just like the kid every single year to film more. And so we see them grow and change as well. the mother, she is married to a couple of different men after Ethan Hawke's character, and some of those relationships don't work out all that well. Ethan Hawke's character, he is the sort of cool dad who drives a black GTO, but eventually he finds a woman to settle down with and have another child. And at the end of the movie, it's funny, he's talking about how both of the kids that he had with Patricia Arquette are now off to college, but he's got at least another 15 years before he's got an empty nest on his hand, because he's got, a relatively new kid. So it's fascinating really to watch this. And the changes are gradual most of the time, but there's actually at one point between 7th and 8th grade when Eller Coltrane changes more dramatically. Suddenly he's a lot taller and thinner, his hair is darker, he just looks dramatically different. And after that, there are some moderate changes to his hair, and he has a little, goatee going on at one point. But the change is gradual. They don't designate, okay, now it's the next year, now it's the next year. You just sort of notice these gradual changes over the course of the movie. And we see him dealing with his various stepfathers, the men his mother is seeing or married to at various times, dealing with his sister, his friends, girlfriends that he has in high school, and teachers and what have you. So it's fascinating. It's a fascinating movie. And I've been looking forward to seeing this for a really, really long time. And when I saw that it was at the Sundance Film Festival earlier this year, I'm like, oh my goodness, it's done. They're going to come out with it. I thought we'd have to wait at least another year for this movie. But here it is. It's exciting. As I said before, this isn't my favorite Linklater movie. I've got a couple of issues with it. Linklater, the director, uses a couple of ways other than just characters' physical appearance to mark the passage of time. He will focus in on electronics in particular, video games that Eller and his friends are playing. It starts off with a Game Boy, and then you see him playing Xbox, and then a Wii, and then you see him playing around with a smartphone. And sometimes those tend to look like advertisements for electronics. In particular, there's one time when he's getting together with friends of his, and they're listening to an iPod in one of those speaker docks, and there's a close-up on it like it's in a commercial. Nobody's doing anything with it, it's just playing. And it would have been, I guess, a little bit it would have gone down easier if someone was actually doing something with it rather than a simple close-up on the stereo itself, just to say, oh look, this is what the device they're looking at now. It just sort of stuck out like a sore thumb to me. A lot of the dialogue scenes, and it's mostly, it's a very dialogue-driven movie, obviously. The scenes with Mason and his parents and the other adults are the stronger scenes in the film because they're more experienced actors. Not that Eller Coltrane is a bad actor, he's fine. But when he's playing scenes in particular with his girlfriend in high school, some of those come off a little bit stilted, and I think it helps him to have more adult actors around to play off of. Some of these conversations just didn't go over as well as the other ones. And I think the movie works better when it's dealing with sort of the mundane aspects of life. There aren't any huge events that happen in this movie. Most of the big events, like for example graduation and first kisses, first dates, things like that, they're not actually depicted in the movie. It's more about key conversations that sort of shift the direction of his life, or at least sort of give you a clear picture as to who he is. And a lot of those occur with with the adults in his life, but on those occasions when he's older and he's talking with his girlfriend in high school, they don't just come off as well, I guess. That was the feeling that I got. Maybe I'll change my mind when I see it on subsequent viewings, but it was kind of the opposite of Lost in Translation, where I felt most of the mundane conversations that Bill Murray and Scarlett Johansson had in that movie were very boring, whereas the one where they're really talking about life in general and the future and children and everything like that was the one scene that kind of stood out as being really good, and the rest of it was kind of boring. I know I'm the exception to most people really like that movie, and I'm not a fan of Lost in Translation. But the thing that bugged me the most about Boyhood, and I think probably this is sort of necessary, because when I read about Linklater and hear him talk about making the movie, he says that he was hoping to find a kid to play the main character, or someone he could get along with, someone who he liked and had a good relationship with. And ordinarily, when you're making a film, people are grouped together for 3 or 4 months, and then they don't see each other again until it's time to promote the movie. Whereas in this case, he had to keep going back to this kid over and over again, and of course these other actors, most of them anyway, to keep filming year after year. And so he was hoping for a cool kid, someone who wouldn't, you know, be temperamental, someone who would be okay with the idea of revisiting this project every single year. And he got that in Eller Coltrane. Eller Coltrane appears to be a very easygoing person. And unfortunately, this creates a lack of dramatic tension, for me anyway. Because he asked for contributions to the character, ideas as to what could happen. Some of the developments in his life seem less dramatic than they could be. He has conversations with adults, like his teacher, with his parents, maybe one of his stepfathers who really doesn't like the fact that he's taken up photography instead of sports, or maybe something more practical. But he really doesn't argue all that much. He just kind of lets the adults have their say and then just does what he wants. And I found it a little frustrating because I was hoping for a little bit more confrontation there, something a little bit more dramatic. But that's not really the style of the kid's personality, and therefore not really the style, the way the film goes itself. He does have a few arguments with people, but they're mostly pretty low-key, and there's no real shouting matches or anything like that, with maybe one exception. A particular stepfather of his is unpleasant and drunk. But I get the feeling that Linklater probably benefited from finding a person who was sort of easygoing in nature to work with, and that helped you know, move the project along, I guess you could say. Or at least it created good working conditions for revisiting every single year. Whereas someone who is maybe a little bit more confrontational, maybe pushed the dramatic angle a little bit more, maybe wouldn't have been as pleasant to work with, maybe wouldn't have been looking forward to going back to and working with every single year, but it would have made for a more dramatic story, or at least more dramatic scenes between some of the characters. Anyway, it's a small complaint, because I think making this movie in the first place the way that he did is quite an accomplishment. And whatever awards or praise that Linklater and the other people who were involved with this movie get for just having made it in the first place is well deserved, on top of, you know, the quality of the movie itself, which is certainly not terrible. It's a really interesting movie. I wouldn't say that it's exciting, but it's certainly different. Of course, I want to take a little bit of time to talk about some of the other films that I've enjoyed by Richard Linklater. So to that effect, I've cooked up a little top 10 list. Number 10 is A Scanner Darkly, which came out around 2006 and is an adaptation of a book that was written by Philip K. Dick, who's responsible for the source material for movies like Minority Report and The Adjustment Bureau and Total Recall, Blade Runner. But unlike those movies, there wasn't a lot of action and chases and futuristic weaponry added to this particular story. It's about an undercover police officer whose name is Bob Arcturus, played by Keanu Reeves. And he is basically trying to get info from drug suppliers in this futuristic time for a product called Substance D, which is very, very addictive and dangerous. Of course, in the course of investigation, he has to pretend to be a drug user, and in order to do that, he has to use some of these drugs, Substance D, and so this creates perception problems for him. He deals with a small group of characters who all sort of gather around this one particular house. They're played by Winona Ryder, Woody Harrelson, Robert Downey Jr., and Rory Cochrane. When he's reporting to his superiors, it's important to hide his identity, and it's important for all these police officers to hide their identity from each other, because they're all undercover agents. So they wear these special suits that completely envelop their bodies and that change appearance as they walk around. There's no one particular face that they wear. They're changing constantly to hide who they are. This movie was rotoscoped, which means that they shot it with cameras, but then animated over all the shots. So what you see are graphic representations of the actors that look very much like the characters, of course, but They're able to paint out boom mics and add special graphics like these special identity-changing suits and other things. Change signs, change license plates, you know, animate little bugs and other hallucinations and what have you. It's a movie that I like and has some interesting surprises in it. Yeah, and he would use this, the rotoscoping on another film, which I'll get to a little bit later. Number 9 is Tape. Tape is based on a play, and like a lot of other Linklater movies, it takes place in a very limited amount of time. In this case, it's a real-time movie, which the events exactly match the length of the story itself, like the length of the movie. A real-time movie doesn't make any leaps forward to hours or days or weeks later, what have you. It's very consistent with real time, as I say. The story, the main characters here are Ethan Hawke and Robert Sean Leonard, who were co-stars in Dead Poets Society a number of years earlier. They're old high school buddies, and Robert Sean Leonard, it takes place in Ann Arbor, Michigan. The Ann Arbor Film Festival is basically showing a film that Robert Sean Leonard has made, and so he has invited Ethan Hawke, one of his old friends, to come and check it out and visit with him. And so they meet in this hotel room where Ethan Hawke is staying, and Ethan Hawke has an ulterior motive because Robert Sean Leonard hooked up with his girlfriend after Ethan Hawke and her broke up all those years ago, and he wants him to confess to something that he did to her. The girlfriend actually shows up later on. She's played by Uma Thurman. Like movies like this, and there's a whole lot of sort of verbal strategizing. Ethan Hawke's character is very sneaky and acts like he doesn't have an agenda, but of course he does. Very, very well acted movie, really, really interesting. I hadn't seen it in many years, so I decided to rewatch it, and I liked it a lot. My number 8 movie is Boyhood, of course. Not my favorite Linklater movie, but I do like it. It's quite admirable. Number 7 is Waking Life. This is a movie that, like one of his earlier movies, one of the movies I mentioned earlier, A Scanner Darkly, is rotoscoped. It was shot with digital cameras, and then they basically animated over all the shots. And unlike A Scanner Darkly, which stayed very much to the image with a few slight alterations here and there, Waking Life's animation is done in a much looser style. There was a different animator for each segment of the movie, and oftentimes buildings and things move around all on their own, and characters' hair flies off in wild ways, and their eyes move around, and it's a much more loose, not a strictly strict replication and animation of the images. The main character in Waking Life is a kid played by Wiley Wiggins, who played the freshman who gets to hang out with all the seniors in Dazed and Confused. He's basically wandering around town, meeting different people, and occasionally seeing something that would suggest that he's dreaming the entire time. A lot of the characters in this movie are in Slacker as well. The structure's like Slacker, and in the sense that he's basically wandering from place to place and speaking with different people. Sometimes he doesn't even talk, sometimes he just listens to them. But he mentions to a character later on that a lot of the information he's getting, if he is dreaming, seems to come from someplace other than himself. It's not like these ideas are his, although they could be, and the other characters are just voicing them. Conversations and concepts dealing with things like evolution and language and all sorts of different heady topics. But he, after waking up several times and discovering that he's still dreaming, he begins to wonder whether or not he's permanently locked in a dream state, and he just doesn't know how to get out of it. Linklater actually plays a character in this. Ethan Hawke and Julie Delpy pop up in sort of this alternate universe version of their characters from the Before trilogy. But a lot of the people that appear in this movie actually were in Slacker, and you recognize them easily by their voices, if not by their faces, because, like I said, they all have been animated over, some of them in a very crude manner, so it's difficult to tell exactly who they are. Also, Adam Goldberg and Nicky Katt make brief appearances in the movie. Adam Goldberg I recognize very easily because of his voice. Yeah, it's just a very sort of philosophical movie, just lots of really heady ideas being thrown around, and the animation, of course, is very strange and surreal. So that's an interesting one. Number 6, Dazed and Confused. Of course, this is a classic cult favorite of Linklater's audience. The people who like his movies like this one a heck of a lot. Takes place, of course, over the course of one day, the last day of school in 1976. Wiley Wiggins, one of the main characters, is a 8th grader who's about to become a freshman at the high school, and most of the other characters are juniors who are about to be seniors. A lot of them play on the football team, and you've got a big ensemble cast full of actors who went on to have pretty big careers. Ben Affleck has a small role. Matthew McConaughey, of course, plays Wooderson. He's got that classic line, "That's what I love about these high school girls. I get older, they stay the same age." And I think he does the all right, all right, all right for the first time in this film. It's like one of the first movies he was ever in. Adam Goldberg, of course, is in it, and Nicky Katt. Just a bunch of people. One of the guys from Rent is in it. Jason London, just a bunch of memorable faces. Joey Lauren-Adams, Michelle Burke, Mila Jovovich. She has like one line in the whole movie which you can hardly hear. Most of it just seems to be there for eye candy. But it was one of those experiences like where it was again another really collaborative thing for Linklater, where he I guess solicits a lot of opinions as to the story and about the characters from his actors. Apparently they had a really, really, really great time making this movie. Didn't do a whole lot of box office when it came out, but it's certainly one of the big cult favorites of his resume. Number 4, Bernie. Bernie is a movie which just came out a couple years ago. McConaughey is in it, and of course the main character is played by Jack Black. Certainly one of the best movies Jack Black has been in. It's based on a true story about a guy living in Texas. I forget exactly what the town is, but it's in northeast Texas, I think. Very well-to-do community. He gets a job basically as the assistant funeral director. He basically takes great care in everything that he does, and he's very, very generous with his time and money, always volunteering to help with musicals and church events and things like that. And he ends up caring for ends up basically having close friendships with a lot of the older ladies in the town, especially the one played by Shirley MacLaine, who's a very sort of a Grinch, the Grinch of the town. You know, she's very possessive and is not warm-hearted, but she enjoys spending time with Bernie just because Bernie is so very insistent on being generous with his time, so they end up spending a lot of time together. And she gets killed. As it turns out, she became a little bit too possessive, and Bernie actually shot her and stuffed her in a cooler in the garage in her home, and then carried on pretending like she was just homesick while he went out and dealt with everybody in the town. So Matthew McConaughey plays a prosecutor, eventually brings the case to trial. It's a really good movie. I hadn't seen it since it came out in the theater, but it's really terrific. I was sort of confused when I first saw it because they have these on-camera interviews with people, residents of the town, but then they actually show up in scenes alongside Jack Black and Shirley MacLaine. And I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute, are they actors or are they actually the real people? And as it turns out, they're actually the real people. Linklater just got them to appear in the scenes as well. Really good movie. Really like this a lot. My number... No, sorry, that was 5. This is 4. I've lost count here. This is Slacker. Slacker, of course, came out in 1991. Linklater made one movie prior to this called It's Impossible to Learn to Plow by... reading books? Yes, It's Impossible to Learn to Plow by Reading Books, that's what it's called. And basically it was just sort of a camera test. A film that lasted a little over an hour of him basically just wandering around riding different trains. And I think that he did this basically just to sort of practice shooting and cutting and developing film, I guess. But Slacker was his first real film, which got distribution in art house theaters around the country. And is something of a cult favorite. The narrative basically doesn't follow any one particular character. It migrates from 2 or 3 people to another 2 or 3 people, never coming back to the same group of characters. But again, it covers an entire day. It starts out early in the morning in Austin with Linklater himself arriving on a bus, I think, in Austin, then taking a cab ride and talking with the driver. Then it migrates from characters to characters all throughout until the next morning. Really like this movie a lot. It's, again, like Waking Life, it's something that's oftentimes very philosophical and sometimes just funny. You know, characters are just sort of weird. But it's an unusual movie, and this was actually the film that inspired Kevin Smith to become a director. He saw this and like, well, if that counts as a movie, then I can make a movie. And so he went on to do Clerks, of course. Yeah, longtime fan of this movie. The last three, of course, are Before Midnight and Before Sunrise and Before Sunset, and they are, of course, a trilogy. And I mentioned Before Sunset last because that's my favorite of the three. Before Sunset is a real-time movie, like tape, in which basically the amount of time that the film lasts is the amount of time that the story takes place within. I'm sure you're familiar with the characters here, but it's Ethan Hawke and Julie Delpy. He's an American, she's French, and they meet on the train while he's traveling to Vienna? Right, Vienna. She's headed home to Paris, but he's going to Vienna. He's going to basically, he's been wandering around Europe on a Eurail pass, and he's going to be flying back to the United States the following morning. And when he meets Julie Delpy on the train, he says, why don't you hang out with me in Vienna overnight, and we'll just hang out and chat and what have you, and then I'll fly home when my plane takes off tomorrow morning, and you can just catch the next train back to Paris. So she agrees, and they spend the entire evening together, and agree to meet the following. And they agree to meet again because they've sort of fallen in love 6 months in 6 months' time. The second movie takes place 9 years after that, after he's written a book about their evening, and she reads it and realizes who he is. They haven't ended in contact between the two stories at this point, but they manage to reconnect in Paris when he's on a book tour. And in the third movie, that takes place another 9 years later, just came out last year, the film, in which the two of them have been together for the last 9 years and have a couple of daughters, and they're on vacation in Greece, and you sort of see the progress in the relationship. They were sort of in the honeymoon phase, the romantic phase of their relationship during the first two movies, but now they've been dealing with kids and careers and things like that. All three of these movies are outstanding. Really, really terrific movies. And they are, you could consider them of a piece, one big long story. And there may be future installments. They may do another episode in 2022 and then another 9 years after that. I don't know, we'll see. But they were written and conceived as individual movies. Kind of like the way Christopher Nolan dealt with each of the Dark Knight movies. He wasn't thinking about whatever the next installment would be. He was just concentrating on that one chapter. And that's kind of what happened here. Yeah, again, these are another movies with a lot of very deep conversations, but in the third movie, it becomes more practical, more about their day-to-day lives and about how having kids and being together has changed them as people. In the third one, they're all really strong movies. These last two were my favorite movies of that particular year. Before Sunrise would have been my number one if Seven by David Fincher had not come out that year. They're all really, really great. And yeah, there was actually a podcast that I took part in, and by that I mean I basically watched them record it, in which they sort of posed a question. It's a film-related podcast called Film Spotting. And they were comparing Richard Linklater, Steven Soderbergh. They had this basically a poll question, which they called a death match. And they said, okay, you have to pick one of these directors, and whichever one you don't pick, their filmography gets completely wiped out. You can never watch any of their movies again. It's all going to be destroyed. So which director you pick? They were comparing Richard Linklater's filmography with Steven Soderbergh's filmography. And as you might know, Steven Soderbergh is one of my all-time favorite directors. I really, really like a lot of his movies. I like his style. But if I had to choose one of the two, I would choose Richard Linklater because of those before movies and because of Boyhood and because of the fact also that he's going to continue to make movies instead of calling it quits and moving into television or other areas of artistry, whereas that's what Soderbergh is doing. He's apparently finished making feature filmmaking. So yeah, again, Richard Linklater has been, a long time favorite of mine. Well, if not a favorite, then certainly someone who I was interested in, especially after he made both Slacker and Dazed and Confused and Before Sunrise, basically those 3 movies in a row. I thought, wow, this guy's really something. I'm really excited about what he does in the future. And not everything he did in the future after that was movies that I really liked. The 2 movies they made after Before Sunset were SubUrbia and The Newton Boys, and I didn't really like either of them all that much. SubUrbia was an ensemble movie that again takes place over the course of one day. It's based on a play by the star and writer of talk radio, Eric Bogosian. And all I really remember from that movie is Steve Zahn pretending to be hit by a car. He's pretending to run away from a car that's driving after him, except the car is actually parked, it's not moving at all. And then he pretends to be hit by the car by throwing himself on the hood. It was a really funny moment, but that was the only thing I liked about that movie. The Newton Boys had McConaughey and Ethan Hawke and Skeet Ulrich, and maybe one other guy as like bank robbers in like the 30s or something like that, or maybe the 20s. It just seemed like a really sloppy movie. I didn't like it all that much. School of Rock, of course, the Jack Black comedy, which I saw and liked well enough, but not as much as a lot of his other movies. Bad News Bears was a remake that starred Billy Bob Thornton. I've not seen that movie. I really don't have any plans to see it. It just doesn't interest me at all. He also did Fast Food Nation, which is another ensemble film. It's based on a nonfiction book, kind of like Mean Girls. It has a pretty big ensemble cast in that. And I saw this movie and liked it, but it wasn't like my favorite or anything like that. And more recently, he did a period piece called Me and Orson Welles, which is about a teenager, a young guy who's involved in the Mercury Theater that Orson Welles was involved with. It started back in, I guess it was the 20s or something like that. I'm not really sure. I saw this movie. That was pretty good as well. But again, there are just a few movies that I didn't like as much as the core 10 right here. I hope that, Ray, you liked this video. I hope that I've informed you as to some of the other aspects of Richard Linklater's career and films that you weren't aware of. The rest of you watching, I hope you enjoyed this very much. I did. I enjoyed rewatching some of these movies, and if you get the chance to check out Boyhood, I would suggest you do so. While I have a couple of reservations about it, they're not big enough to say don't go see it. I would say definitely check it out because it's a unique experience. Thanks very much. Appreciate it, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.